What is up, guys? Today on the Football Guys Dynasty Football Show, we're diving into rookie wide receivers, and we're going deep, especially on the podcast. So if you watch on YouTube, make sure you go over to the podcast. We're going to go a little deeper over there. But let's dive into the top three guys because it's pretty much the same top three out there, maybe different order if you're crazy. But we have Marvin Harrison Jr. So let's just talk about him. There's a narrative that the Ohio State wide receiver possibly isn't the wide receiver one. We've been seeing that from different analysts out there, and I don't know where that's coming from. I guess maybe I understand that Malik Nabers from LSU is talented, but Marvin Harrison Jr. pretty much has it all as a prospect. What do you think about that narrative that he's not maybe wide receiver one, Jeff?
It's interesting. I don't know. I think people are bored, to be honest with you. I think that people have kind of looked at the same thing over and over again for the last 2.5 months and tried to figure something out. And, we get to silly season. We get close to the NFL draft. People start talking about different directions. It's kind of, I said on the quarterback episode, talking about Drake May with the CJ Stroud comparison. I think there's similarities there where let's talk about something different. We've talked about Marvin Harrison Jr. being our wide receiver one for 2.5 months, for the last year or more. And let's talk about something different now. And frankly, I don't see it in terms of, I see them being very, very close, but I don't see Nabers being ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr. I think that Marvin Harrison Jr., there are areas that he can attack better than Malik Nabers. I think you can certainly build maybe a more modern NFL offense around Nabers, given what he can accomplish in the short to intermediate game. But the way that Marvin Harrison Jr. can dictate coverage and attack vertically downfield, stretch your safeties in that area, I think is just a little bit different than what Nabers can bring to the field. And I mean, we're splitting hairs at some level, but it's still Marvin Harrison Jr. has been the wide receiver one, will be the wide receiver one, has been. And yes, from the last several years. So he's a great player.
This is one of those instances where the NFL teams know what kind of player he is, told him not to test. And so he hasn't been in the spotlight for this entire pre-draft process. Whereas these other guys, Nabers had a fantastic pro day. Odunze had a fantastic combine. Those guys often get pushed up boards in the eyes of media and just the general public, where Marv was good enough that they said, don't do those things, please. Don't get hurt. This is a borderline generational wide receiver prospect. There's always been a gap between Marv and the next two. I think the good thing about Marvin Harrison Jr. is there's still so much to unlock. We didn't see him as a threat after the catch. I think he can be that. He's an elite athlete. We didn't need the testing to know that he's an elite athlete. So I think when you look at his contested catch ability, his ability to profile as a true wide receiver one, this is a player that I have rated higher than I had Jamar Chase in his class. And so when you start to talk about that, he's the best player. If we're not putting any weight on any position, this is the best player in the draft. He's better than the quarterbacks. Quarterbacks obviously are going to get drafted higher than him, but this is the best player that, should be a top most boards. I think he probably is a top most boards, but I don't think too many teams are going to get a shot at him because I don't think he lasts outside the top 5.
I think a narrative that I've seen out there is talking about how Nabers was a higher rated high school recruit than Marvin Harrison Jr. I think it's important to realize that Marvin Harrison Jr. as a high school recruit he was underweight, to be frank. And the way that he has changed his body in 3 years at Ohio State, that's the type of thing that makes NFL talent evaluators take notice. And he is a prototype now relative to being a bit undersized.
That's a good point, too. I mean, and also he's Marvin Harrison's son. So he might not have the draft capital, but the dude's got the pedigree, and that matters, especially for the wide receivers when you're thinking of it. And for those of you that don't watch college football, which I don't blame you, especially with the portal going on right now, I'm going to sound like a boomer. It is ridiculous out there. Ohio State, Kyle McCord was not a very good quarterback last year for them. And so I think there was a struggle offensively. You saw that at a lot of times, and I think he elevated that offense at times. And people say he had a down year. He still had 1,200 yards and 14 touchdowns. He is one of the better prospects out there. And I think Christian hit on the most important point. He's not done yet. He's still developing. Like, he came in pretty raw as a freshman. He kind of came out in that Rose Bowl game. He looked really good. He stood out a little bit. Hey, he gained about 20 pounds-ish, 25 pounds since he came in as a freshman. Really worked on his game. His route running is special. I love his route running. It's improved every single year at Ohio State. You have to love that. And he still had time, and he's still developing. He has that. I love Nabers too. I love them both. But to me, they are definitely in a different tier. I still have Marvin Harrison and Caleb Wiliams and Superflex in the same tier. and Nabers is kind of in that tier by himself at 103. But I still have Marvin above him a little bit, just based on that potential and that ceiling there. To get it to fantasy real quick, is there a scenario where you take Marvin Harrison Jr. at 101, Jeff, and Superflex?
No, I don't. I don't see it. I mean, who are you hoping he plays with? Maybe Josh Allen? I don't know. Patrick Mahomes? Are they going to be ultra aggressive and go up to the very top of the draft? I mean, that's about the only scenario that I could think I could entertain. Even with the Chargers, if he's Justin Herbert's top wide receiver, you're still looking at a Jim Harbaugh offense that you're questioning what the passing volume is going to be in that one. I think Arizona's a great landing spot for him, but at the same time, that's going to push him above Caleb Williams, and especially with the Bears now, the addition of Keenan Allen, the addition of DeAndre Swift, having DJ Moore there, having still more ammunition to be able to fill that out. I mean, we've talked about before, again, on the quarterback episode, if you flash back a couple weeks ago, how Caleb Williams is landing into one of the best landing spots for a number 1 overall pick quarterback. And so to change that in Superflex, it's just not going to be there for me.
For what it's worth, there's some buzz that the Bears are going to move up from 9 if the Cardinals trade out and try to get Marvin Harrison Jr. at number 5 to pair with Caleb Williams. But I do want to caution people that while that sounds super exciting, and I think that is super exciting, especially as someone who supports the Bears, that is not a situation where you're going to get the immediate production from Marvin Harrison Jr. with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen there. So that's not a situation where I would take Marv over Caleb either. There aren't too many landing spots that would push Marvin Harrison Jr. ahead of Caleb Williams. I actually don't think that exists at all.
I still
wonder
like the Arizona
the opposite.
spot. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. The opposite, are there landing spots that could push some of maybe the other quarterbacks above Marvin Harrison Jr. in Superflex for you?
No.
If
maybe
if
the
Drake
Vikings.
I was just gonna say, if Drake May goes to the Vikings,
Yeah.
yes, I think that's a thing that I would do.
It'd be
Marvin
hard
Harrison
though.
Jr. to the Patriots.
Yep.
It'd be hard, yeah. I mean, if that happens, though, since I tweeted about it back in November, I have to give myself a victory lap. So I hope that kind of happens. But enough with Marvin. We're gonna go into the other 2 guys that we have in our top 3 here on YouTube. But be sure to get ready for the rookie guide. We have the rookie guide version 3.0 is coming. Much to our chagrin, we're going to be diving into that boy next weekend, getting you ready for your rookie draft. Starting that Monday, Tuesday of the following week, right after that draft, it is ready for you guys. It's a massive, massive guide, so be sure to subscribe to Football Guys so you can get that. And before you move on, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. Comment below, too. What do you think about Marvin Harrison Jr.? Where are you at in terms of Harrison and Nabers there? Do you think there's a discrepancy between the 2?
Also, be sure to head to footballguys.com/plans to get a premium subscription. Elite subscribers get custom dynasty, IDP, salary cap, and best ball content for less than $70 annually. Head to footballguys.com/plans to join today. And that is the way that you will get that version 3 of the rookie guide. So that is a great incentive if you're on the fence. And as we move into rookie draft season, as we move into really redraft season, we really get fired up. We do our player spotlights. We have all that coverage on Football Guys. It's a great time for you to sign up right now.
All right, let's dive into our wide receiver 2, Malik Nabers. So we talked about a little bit with Harrison because I think you have to for context-wise. 6 foot, 200 pounds, came out as a junior, 5-star prospect in terms of when he came out of LSU. 89 catches this last year, 1,500 yards, 14 touchdowns. So absolutely dominated with Jaden Daniels. Looked great. Brian Thomas Jr. there in that offense. They were in a lot of negative game scripts because I'm going to tell you right now that defense was terrible. It was one of the worst secondaries I've ever seen. So a lot of points getting put on the board there. We wrote about him in the guide. He obviously, when you think about him, scheme versatile, explosive, top-end speed. We've seen that. Explosiveness, really creative in yak situations where I think some people might give him the bump over Marvin. Like, hey, yeah, yak ability to kind of go top of the defense, kind of work inside out. I think there's the things that like people really see on tape that they love about him. I think he's explosive. We were talking about him way last year about this guy. But what is your overall take from him, Jeff, on Nabers? And is he your clear wide receiver 2?
He's my clear wide receiver 2, but I think that you started off in an interesting place that I think deserves and needs to be mentioned, talking about Malik Nabers. And really, I think when you look at Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Nabers numbers-wise, I don't know if you can get too almost different scenarios where Marvin Harrison Jr., yes, he had his high school quarterback and he was very locked on Marvin Harrison Jr., but that Ohio State defense was dominant. And for most of Ohio State's games, they were kind of choking out the opponent and bleeding out the clock a little bit. They would use Marvin Harrison Jr., they would get up. They were in a lot of back and forth games. And relative to Malik Nabers, I don't know if there was a more offensive conducive environment to what that LSU defense was not. And so they're in shootouts every single week. And so if you're making your argument, your case for Nabers to be above Marvin Harrison Jr. and using statistics for that reason, I think you're really looking at apples and oranges. And I think that that's one of the things that I think college statistics in general, there's so much context and so many different things to peel back involved in that. And so if you don't understand those types of things and you're looking at just raw numbers, yeah, Malik Nabers was fantastic, but he needed to be because that team couldn't stop anybody, and so I think that that's interesting. But again, he was able to do that, and I think that the other thing, the SEC has kind of morphed over the last handful of years from being a defense dominant first league to being really a lot more what we've thought about the traditional Big 12 and a lot more spread offenses, a lot more openness and a lot of those types of things. And so that's just talking about peeling back layers on the statistical context between the two of them. But I think when you look at Nabers' game, I mean, he would be wide receiver one in last year for sure, the year before probably for sure. I mean, you're going back, Jamar Chase maybe would be the last time that he wouldn't be the clear wide receiver one in the class. And so that's one of the things that the takeaway, that it's not a knock on Nabers' game to have Marvin Harrison Jr. in his class, but you feel really, really good if you've got that 103, that 104 in your superflex draft, and you're able to walk away with Nabers. Again, you mentioned a great ability after the catch, great ability to be a modern focal point in a short to intermediate passing game, handle a lot of volume, and that's what you love for fantasy football.
I think we definitely debate if Nabers was better than Jamar Chase, even in that class. I mean, we had debates that year with Waddle, Devontae. Like there was a ton of wide receivers in that class. That class is very similar to this class because Malik Nabers, while I do see a gap between him and Marvin Harrison Jr., this is an elite prospect. He's a top 10 prospect in this class. We talked about the acceleration. Every time I came back to a comp, and Jeff, your comp is better, but I kept watching and I'm like, man, this is very Antonio Brown-esque. Antonio Brown at his peak accelerated at a speed that I had never seen before, and that's why he was so dominant at the NFL level. I see that from Malik Nabers as well. Granted, that was on the college field. I obviously want to see that happen in the NFL as well, but this is a player that can change an offense very, very quickly. I think you talk about some of his potential landing spots. You know, a lot of people are mocking him in the top 10, maybe 6 to the Giants, maybe it's 9 to the Bears, and kind of offering the same thing that DJ Moore does, or maybe it's 10 to the Jets and he's opposite Garrett Wilson. These are all really good landing spots to me, where I think Nabers can be a fantasy relevant, like top probably 15 to 16 wide receiver, even as a rookie. I think that's where, you know, we do rank these guys as prospects. And I think landing spot certainly will impact this tier between Nabers and Odunze, because if Odunze goes to the Giants, for example, and Nabers goes to an Aaron Rodgers-led Jets team, I think that I would prefer Nabers. But to me, these two are in that tier where if it's flipped, that could change for fantasy football. And I think that, you know, they offer different skill sets, but they have the ability to just rack up fantasy points, which is what we're looking for.
The funny thing, I love how you brought up the comp, because he comped into Torrey Holt out there, everybody. So if those of you that need to know, Jeff did that in January. That's all I've been seeing the last few months is Torrey Holt comps, and I start laughing. Every time I see it, I'm like, they read Jeff Bell's work, and they don't even like Jeff Bell. No, I'm just kidding. But when I go through it, you guys make a good point about Malik. I think that, you know, I'm terrible at comps, but he really kind of reminds me of Jamar Chase a little bit. Like when I watch him, I know it's the LSU thing and I know it's all that, but he's freaking aggressive. You know, when he comes up, he's able to go get it. Like he's got that dominant feel. Like he's got that alpha vibe of like, hey, I'm going to go get this ball. I'm going to come down within 50-50 situations. He also, when you're looking at just the numbers, his separation, his skills there, you know, his yards per out run, like all the things that really you like about him. Now, offense, yes. this offense was catered to that. Like, so when you're thinking about like what they were able to do in that conference, I think the other thing too, and I saw some people talking about it, and he got a little negative about his off-field stuff. That was a real concern last year. Like, he did have some off-field concerns last year. We see the Rashee Rice thing. We see some of this stuff. Like, I think it's one of those things where like you're not going to say he's going to do that, but I don't think it's one of those things where you can just dismiss either. Like, there were some concerns heading into last season about his maturity level, and we've seen LSU wide receivers have that issue. Kayshon Boutte, for example, this last year, before he was going to be that top 5 guy, obviously didn't test as well as Malik and do those things, but we've seen those maturity things, so that's something to kind of just to know. I think so, and I think he's got to work on like his route tree. I think understanding kind of what can he be at the NFL level. I think Marvin can be a little bit more from that perspective. That's why I moved him up a little bit. But if we're thinking landing spots, if Malik goes to the Chargers, are we in on that spot?
Yeah.
Like 103 in?
I think so. Yes.
Okay.
It's still a great pairing with Justin Herbert. And I know I mentioned with Marvin Harrison Jr., a diminished passing volume. It's a fantastic pairing with Herbert, and you look long term, their ability to work together, it's still something that you want to. I mean, there are much worse places.
We don't love the Giants, right? Or do we?
It's difficult because who's getting them the ball, but at the same time they have absolutely nothing else, and so he would immediately be the entire focal point of that offense. And so I think that there's an argument to be made there of, hey, they're going to have to force the ball to him 12 to 15 times a game, because what else can they do? But if Daniel Jones is the guy delivering that, what are you going to have?
Me and Christian know who's getting the ball.
Drew Lock,
baby. Yeah, see, we're in it. We're on it together. The Drew Lock season is I'll tell you what. If you're a Malik Nabers fan, he gets drafted by the Giants, you better hope Drew Lock gets that head knock, because he's gonna throw like 75 targets a game to Malik Nabers. That dude will get peppered with targets all day, and they might not be catchable, not all of them, but they will. He'll certainly get the target share.
Enough of them.
Oh my gosh. The analytic guys, oh my God, that target share would knock them off their feet. They wouldn't even be able to stand after seeing that box score every day. If Drew Lock's their quarterback, if it's Daniel Jones, he'll get 2 targets and 5 uncatchable passes. But yeah, that's the question there. Anything else on Nabers there?
No, like we talked about, wide receiver 1 in most classes. And that's what, as we go through this wide receiver class, I mean, I think you can make an argument that most of these guys would be, top 15 to 20 picks. And a lot of these guys, not most of these guys, we're going to talk about a lot of wide receivers, but a lot of these guys would be top 20 picks in most years. But unfortunately, they're in a group with these 3. So
Yeah. All right. Rome Odunze. Okay. So not to be shine. I don't know. I just work in education. Is the wide receiver 3 for us, but in others, wide receiver 1 and 2. I've seen him as 1. I see some people really believe in Rome. His profile, what he does. Obviously, 9.91 relative athletic score. He tested 4.45 40, 39 vertical jump. You love that about him. Obviously, produced very well last year at Washington. 1,600 yards, 13 touchdowns. And we're talking about an offense that was excellent for wide receiver production and everything that we saw there. Yeah, obviously that was the offense that we'd like to see. Obviously, their head coach is in Alabama now. The offense coordinator's in Seattle, which is exciting for a lot of Seattle people in terms of that, and fantasy owners of their wide receivers. So Rome comes in, and Rome's a little bit older prospect. He's a senior. Really good, vertical ball tracker. I think the question is, and this is the question, Jeff watched a lot of these guys. We've kind of dived into them. Does he have the separation? Do you think that he can create that separation at the next level? Do you think that is his biggest question mark, Jeff?
He's got the speed. I mean, it's kind of one of those things. He's got the speed, but the way that he played at Washington, he played to physicality quite a bit. And so that makes you a little bit nervous when you see a college player like that play to physicality. And I mean, we've talked about before the creativeness of Ryan Grubb's offense and their ability to have those 3 receivers, have Michael Penix Jr. He was in another very rich offensive environment. So, yeah, I'm not overly concerned about his ability to separate at the NFL level. And a lot of things, it's interesting because I think that NFL offenses have gotten a lot better of scheming separation and creating opportunity for players. And he is the type of player that he can create after the catch. So he can bring that. And so not overly concerned about it, but yeah, I mean, if you're going to find a knock on him, I guess that's the direction you would go.
Yeah, another one where I was looking at comps early on, and to me, he plays very similarly to DeAndre Hopkins, in that I think that despite the what seems like he's not separating, it doesn't matter because he catches everything that comes his way, and I think that's an important piece because he was able to show that at the college level. I think that's one question that we have about a few of these guys is can they catch the ball across the middle while contested while bracing for a hit. I think we can confidently say that Odunze showed that off this last year. That was one of his big questions going into last year, but then he just became this complete wide receiver that just I don't really see. I guess that is the weakness, actually separating. But like I said, I think if he's catching everything anyway and he can kind of play bully ball, this sounds crazy, but like that's how Puka Nakua won last year. Is he's not a great separator either, but he just another former Washington wide receiver, by the way. But he just would win by out muscling you, and I think Odunze's got a little bit of that to his game. Like I said, Odunze and Nabers are in that same tier for me. These are three wide receivers very much so worthy of a top 10 selection. I think that there's a chance that we see that. I think there's more of a chance that one of these wide receivers does fall outside the top 10 than we've seen in the media over the last 2 months, including in all of my mock drafts for what it's worth. So I think it's worth noting that one of these guys might fall because the offensive tackle class is a little crazy. That shouldn't prevent you from drafting them in fantasy because they're still going to be top 15, top 20 picks. I mean, they won't get out of the top 15. That's for sure.
Yeah, I want to go over the numbers real quick, and then I'll let Jeff pontificate about why he's better than everybody. But let's go look at this. So when you're looking at receiving depths for deep, medium, short, in terms of what he did, like Christian was talking about, for 20 plus yards this year, when you're looking at Rome's 23 receptions for 49 targets, 30.3 ADOT. So this guy, I mean, that deep ball was there. But what he's talking about with contested catches and him just not dropping anything, he was 9 for 14 on contested catches for over 20 yards, which is fantastic. 64.3% there. No drops. He did not drop one single pass. So what that's saying is a lot of those were probably uncatchable when you're looking at that or just not on target. Medium from 10 to 19, he was 7 for 8 for contested catches, 87% percentage there, and then one drop there. So he did have one drop there. And then from short, I mean, he was pretty much just dominant there. He caught everything that was going his way. And on the year, he only had 3 drops. That was it. And for how many targets that he had and what he was able to put on the field, you have to love like just the numbers. I think that's what the numbers guys are going to love him. Obviously, he had 140 targets, 3 drops.
Be careful. He's a late breakout. Remember, he didn't do it until the 4th year.
That's right. I forgot about that year. Context doesn't matter, though, because when you look at Washington, the first 2 years that he was there, he had some of the worst offensive and quarterback play there. So you need to understand that. Like, I think all 4 quarterbacks transferred his sophomore year after his sophomore year, had a new coach, got the new system in there. But you have to love that. Receiving grade last year, 89.5 for PFF. Like, man, his numbers do pop. And I've actually, I was kind of a Rome hater before the year. Like, I'll be the first to admit, like, I was kind of one of those guys like, hopefully, can he do it? He does it. And he just flat out balled. And I think he has clearly been the wide receiver 3. I have him at 107 in Superflex. That's where my value is for him still. But maybe I'm too low. Maybe he should be ahead of Brock in non-tight end premium. And maybe you go with Rome. Jeff, any final thoughts on Rome?
I'm glad Christian mentioned Puka Nakua, and we know Puka Nakua is a former Washington player, but I think that when you look at a lot of where Puka Nakua was able to succeed, that physicality, and then when you look at the way that defenses are playing now with the 2 high safeties, creating space and allowing receivers underneath, I think that there was a thought process at some point of maybe if we have smaller, quicker wide receivers, they can take advantage of that. But I think that when you see what Puka Nakua was able to do last year, teams are trying to figure out maybe being a little bit more inventive on if we have bigger physical wide receivers, how can it's that push pull. And it was one of those things that the big wide receivers felt like they had been phased out of the game. We want these small, fast receivers, let them create in space. But now you have a lot of big receivers in this class. And if I'm an NFL offense, and particularly I look at a team that is picking 8th right now with having Zach Robinson, the new offensive coordinator, as the Atlanta Falcons, and I spent a lot of money on bringing Kirk Cousins in here, we are a win now window. And I'm looking at this team, and sure, I brought in Darnell Mooney and Rondale Moore, but outside of Drake London and Kyle Pitts, what do you have in the receiver room? And so I think that when you look at Puka Nacua, what he was able to do with Zach Robinson and the way that you can attack that space that's created, instead of trying to use the smaller, quicker players, use bigger players that are more difficult to tackle, that creates opportunity. And I think that would be an interesting landing spot in Atlanta for Rome Odunze, possibly at number 8.
That would hurt all the Pitts and London truthers out there. They would just get completely upset. And that could happen. We've seen this happen in drafts. Like, we've seen this happen in NFL draft, and we've seen those things.
That would hurt Darnell Mooney's feelings as well. That dude, he did not get targets. He signed somewhere. He's like, I'm getting all the targets. I'm wide receiver 2.
Poor Darnell.
That would be pretty upsetting for that guy. So.
What about Rondale? Don't hate on Rondale either.
I loved Rondale. I'm pretty upset that it didn't work out, and I still don't think it's going to work. Atlanta is going to add a wide receiver. I don't think they want him to be their wide receiver 3.
Yeah. All right. Anything else, Christian?
No. Just make sure you guys head over to the podcast. The full version of every show can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. We are going to talk about like 15 more wide receivers over there. More than that. I can't math right now. There's definitely more than 15 on this list. So if you're enjoying the show, make sure you head over to the podcast version, subscribe to the Football Guys Dynasty Football Show.